was supported by other panel members, dismissing Alhaji Atiku Abubakar's appeal and challenging the Presidential Petitions Tribunal's decision. Additionally, the court rejected Atiku's application to present Bola Tinubu's credentials obtained from the CSU, with some justices finding the application frivolous and vexatious. Now, joining us this evening on the conversation to discuss this is Segun Sopitan, Chairman, Accountability, Candour and Transparency Network for Political Discussions. He joins us live from Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos. We also have Chukwuma Okenwa, the Executive Director of Lead Network Africa, joins us from the nation's capital, Abuja. One welcome to you, gentlemen, and thanks for joining me on the conversation.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, I'd like to start with Chukwuma in Abuja. Mr. Okenwa, what do you make of yesterday's Supreme Court judgment affirming the victory of President Bola Tinubu at the polls? And what are the implications for the country?
I would rather say that it left me with lots of thoughts, whether the Supreme Court and the appellate courts is perhaps now lawmakers and not just a platform to interpret the law based on the substance of the law. Because it does appear to me that certain positions of the law, when it comes to like the status of the FCT, like seeing FCT that it has no special status whatsoever, tends to contradict all of the special status that we know that FCT currently enjoys, both as the head of administration in Nigeria, and also we have like a former governor of a state who is currently the FCT minister. So if Abuja people don't have that privilege of choosing their own state-owned governors, you know, to carry on with the issues of governance, then one would wonder why anyone would want to assume that Abuja has no special status. And also like issues as very serious as like that of a forgery, discharging it on the altars of technicalities, I mean, it's not one that we expect from the temple of justice, because coming with all those technicalities, it should have been submitted within the 180 days of the law, as against grievous issues which at any time should count before the law. I think is one that our justices should have looked at carefully, else the lords would have, unconsciously be endorsing like a new path in Nigeria, and I think it's a dangerous trend.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chukwuma Okenwa. Now, I'd like to bring Segun Sopitan into the conversation. Mr. Sopitan, what factors do you think may have influenced the Supreme Court's decision affirming President Bola Tinubu's win in the polls, and how do these factors reflect the state of Nigerian politics?
Okay, so it's a complex question that you asked, or at least the answers to the question seem to be complex. And I say this because there are several angles that one would have to look at this if you want to be objective and fair-minded. On the one hand, is the fact that, so if you ask about factors, you have to acknowledge that for a Supreme Court, or any court for that matter, to remove a sitting president is a big decision. It's a significant decision. It's a decision that could have far-reaching implications to the peace and harmony of society. And therefore, it's a decision that to make, you would have to have very clear and very strong arguments in support of that decision. So in this instance, a lot of the things that we've seen with regards to the election itself, I think it's become clear that the burden of proof as provided by the law and within the time frame provided in the Electoral Act is almost insurmountable. If the courts are saying that you must provide if not a witness, an eyewitness for every single polling unit, 176,000 of them. If they're even saying that you must provide an eyewitness from a significant proportion of those 176,000, let's even say it's 100,000. How do you do that in 180 days? It's practically impossible. So that's one big factor. The fact that the burden of proof is very difficult to cross, and then the fact that for you to remove a sitting president, you would have to have very strong evidence as to the charges that have been laid. And unfortunately, the law doesn't allow or permit such, an atmosphere to provide that evidence. Now another factor.
Go ahead, please.
For me, so another factor that we have to recognize is the manner and approach and the legal prosecution strategy of the opposition people. So the Atiku Abubakar and PDP camp and the Peter Obi camp and the Labour Party in particular. I think that from all that we've seen so far, they were not, they didn't anticipate, they were not proactive enough, in anticipating what the provisions of the law are and what the likely position of the judges was going to be, so that they could then go ahead of them. They should have been a step ahead of their adversaries. It does appear as though they were not. They were always 1, 2, sometimes 4 steps behind, a very formidable adversary. And I think that's a major factor as well. So the opposition camp would also have themselves to blame for not doing some of the things they should have done when they should have done them.
Now, staying with you, Mr. Sopitan, before I move to Chukwuma, just quickly, you mentioned something about, you said it's hard to remove a sitting president, and some have argued, some commentators and scholars have said, you know what, why don't we deal with litigation before swearing in? How possible is this? And do you buy that argument that before a swearing-in is done, the Supreme Court should have decided all matters with regards to election petitions should be settled?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I agree. However, it's easy to say this. I agree. I think that this has to be the way forward. However, in order to achieve that, there's a lot of significant reforms that need to happen. There's a lot of significant reforms that need to happen to our electoral laws, to INEC, and to the judiciary and their rules of practice of the various courts, whether the appeal court, the tribunal, or the Supreme Court. If you want a situation where we can determine cases before swearing in, and then you say you have 180 plus 60 days, where's my mathematics? I think that gives us about 220 days or thereabouts, or 240 days. Is it possible to conduct an election 240 days before swearing in? Clearly, no. You can't have a president-elect almost a full year ahead of his ascension of office, which means then that the timing for the prosecution of cases must be reduced. And in order for that to happen, then your electoral laws and the proof of burden, the requirements of the law will have to change. You would have to revise the entire process. You would have to bring technology in. So yes, I agree that we need to do this, but the process and the things that we need to do to achieve that are so many that I just don't think that we have the will as a people to go down that road successfully.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sopitan. Now, back to you, Chukwuma. You did mention in your opening statement that you're not too satisfied with the Supreme Court's judgment. You mentioned the issue of Abuja, its special status, and you also mentioned some technicalities within the legal system. Now, my question to you is, to what extent does the Supreme Court's judgment of yesterday highlight systemic issues within the Nigerian judiciary? And how can the judiciary regain public trust in the aftermath of this ruling?
First, let me say that worthy of note would be gauging the temperature of the nation yesterday, because that yesterday officially marked the end of politics and the official commencement of governance. And one would expect that if Nigerians largely and truly voted for President Tinubu, it should be like joy, because at this particular point, the distractions, the contentions over the given mandate by Nigerians has been fully reclaimed. And we would have wanted to see like jubilations all across the nation But of course, that did not happen. And that really shows that this is like a clear case of the judiciary hijacking the role of INEC and at the same time backing INEC for incompetencies. In this nation, we have an electoral act that empowers INEC to set its own guidelines. The guidelines were set, giving the citizens an assurance that, the beavers, the IRA portal were going to be largely deployed. And not just that, don't forget that a budget was made for this that runs into hundreds of billions of taxpayers' funds. If it was just a case of maybe INEC wanted to use that before, and there was nothing like, like some budget being made that, which we know that the budget certainly have to pass through the process of becoming a law before that can be implemented. So that means that it was lawful, that the things the funds were earmarked for were judiciously done, but even in the course of the process when it was still at the appellate court, we could recall that when the court ordered that Labour Party should be given access to the materials that that they desired as part of the thing to file up the case, we saw INEC not coming forth, and one would have expected that the court should have shown that this is a clear contempt of the court, but that did not happen. We saw delays, we saw a lot of bottlenecks, and that just went, So when the judiciary have a situation where the court orders are not obeyed, even sometimes by the federal government, and they don't see that as a slight on the court. I want to say something which is very important. Yes, we agree that perhaps if the judgment is concluded, before the swearing in and all the rest of it, that could make some difference. But the fact remains that the same constitution that empowers that through a process of an election, a president can be made, the same constitution empowers the judiciary, even in matters like this, to give judgment, and once it's according to the constitution. Supposing the court, looked into the matter and say, well, legally, President Tinubu shouldn't have been declared based on the fact of the case, heavens wouldn't have fallen. I mean, one man cannot be greater than the nation. And like I always put it, the president of Nigeria is not more Nigerian than any other person. And we must have to realize that. In any nation where there is rule of law, law means law is supreme. It doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah,
because that's where the Supreme Court, when you have some people who are bigger than the law.
And the Supreme Court has made a decision which brings an end to this case. So, Chukwuma, I want to take you up on something you mentioned in the course of this discussion. You said the supporters of the president and the APC did not celebrate. You didn't see widespread jubilations. I've heard some of their supporters say, they were just magnanimous in victory. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's laughable because, if you're talking about Nigeria, 8 point something million votes is quite a lot, right? So we want to see that resonate. So for a few people to come, make some of those comments, look at the mood of the nation. And one of the things again that is really, I think it's really unhealthy for our democracy. Like this particular year's election, we have lots of litigations like never before. A situation where we leave now everything to the court to give citizens, the governors they think, the presidents they think. It's not healthy for our democracy. We want to see more of people congratulating their winners. That's the beauty of democracy.
The way, like we saw, like when we saw President Jonathan, former President Jonathan, pick up the call to congratulate former President Muhammad Buhari, and that's what it should be. And you're right about the proliferation of litigations in courts, especially it seems the courts have taken over the duty of INEC as the ones that should declare winners of elections. Thank you very much, Chukwuma. I'd like to bring Segun back into the conversation. Now, Mr. Sopitan, President Bola Tinubu yesterday did react to his victory at the Supreme Court with emphasis on unity and collaboration. This emphasis is quite important that he made in a statement. Could you elaborate on how this might impact social cohesion, governance and policy making in Nigeria? And what does he need to do going forward to, unite the country?
Look, it's a difficult situation that the president finds himself in. The first reality, and I say reality, not fact, is that more people voted against him, voted not to have him, than did vote to have him. In this last election, there were 24 million votes, and only a third of the people that voted, if I'm not mistaken, 8 million out of 24, wanted him. So which means that he has a legitimacy problem to deal with. And in order to cross that problem or to resolve it, he is going to have to build bridges. He's going to have to be to show that he is deliberate about trying to extend hands of fellowship across the divides of opposition that he might have. And when I say opposition, I don't necessarily mean political opposition, even civil society opposition, those people that actually did not vote for him, the young and vibrant Nigerian youth that came out, thinking that they would get one particular outcome, but they got something else, who still till now, regardless of the Supreme Court ruling, believe that their mandate was stolen. The president has to reach out to those people and win them over. And I think that one of the ways that he can do that is to be a bit more, what's the word now, human in his approach to issues of governance and policy. You have certain things that you want to achieve, as a president, as a government, in terms of policy. You need to implement certain policies, but there are several ways that you can implement the same policy. If you go about your policy declarations and implementation in a very rough, short, very high-handed manner, nobody, I don't care whose ox is God approach, given your legitimacy issues, you will simply aggravate more people against you, and they will not cooperate. And there is no president, no leader in any country, in any territory that can succeed without the support of his people. So that is a huge challenge that the president needs to find a way to surmount. And let's not forget that regardless of the ruling of the Supreme Court, there are controversies that continue to bedevil this president. As we speak, we're expecting officially, so this is not hearsay, the security agent services of a foreign territory are going to release files, about our president into the public domain. So we are still waiting with bated breath for 31st of October and the days thereafter to see what the FBI, the IRS, and other services of the United States government will release, and how damning or otherwise this will be. So all of this will have a bearing on how the president will have to go about his duties in the next, couple of months. So if the fact that the Supreme Court has ruled does not necessarily mean that the distractions are over. I think we're still a few months from having a settled government. So if I were to advise the president, I would say that he should walk, and talk to the people with a bit more decorum, with a bit more understanding, and deploy his policy actions in a way that will not make life more difficult for them. If the people are happy, then they will be willing to overlook whatever moral issues that they have with the emergence of the president. If they are unhappy and they're suffering, then you only aggravate the situation.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Sopitan. Now, back to you, Chukwuma. It wasn't just the political parties that were on trial. The electoral umpire, INEC, the Independent National Electoral Commission of Nigeria, was also on sort of trial because a lot of Nigerians were not happy with its conduct of the elections. And the Supreme Court justices did say the elections were not perfect. They left a lot to be desired. Now, the role of INEC in this case is quite significant. How does this ruling impact the public's confidence in INEC's ability to conduct free and fair elections in Nigeria? And we also have off-cycle elections coming in a few weeks. So what lessons should INEC pick up from all of what have happened since the general elections?
Well, why will INEC learn some lessons when there are no consequences, for the last way they managed the election? And what I really find very ridiculous in the whole process is that this same INEC that, went to court saying, well, based on our laws and all the rest of it, we can transfer, not transmit, and all the rest, we conducted like competent election, And even when the appellate court has handed over a decision, INEC made a press statement saying, well, that they are justified. And then ahead of some very crucial elections coming up, we see the same INEC coming with the same story that these results will be transmitted strictly using the IREF, and then that the beavers will be very functional. And if we can recall, before these elections, there were already like speculations that INEC is going to jettison the IREF or the beavers at some point. And INEC came, Candour had a press statement, said it emphatically that they were committed to following the right process. But unfortunately, we see, the same INEC trying to defend their incompetencies. So the impact on the citizen is that many people really feel that they have wasted their time in the past election, and that is going to you're going to have like increased voter apathy, because many people feel like, their votes didn't really count in the last election, so it's now a situation where like anybody that is coming to rule, you have less more of the citizens endorsing you, and that's to me like more or less like legitimate crisis, even before the person's government begin, because you have a greater population saying, well, we didn't vote for this man, we didn't get interested because we know that our vote is not going to count. And I don't think that is healthy for our democracy. And guess what? This that INEC and Judiciary has done, like my brother identified, some issues that are ahead coming, it's going to affect Nigeria's image on the international scene. It's going to impact on the chances of foreign direct investment, confidence, that investors' confidence is going to be lacked in terms of doing business with the country. And look at how Naira is really crashing. So wheels politics may have ended, but of course the consequences has come to stay, and we need to do something as a matter of urgency to see how we can save Nigeria.
Now, quickly, Chukwuma, you didn't answer what INEC needs to do to redeem its image ahead of the staggered elections coming up.
Well, I really think that for this time around, whatever thing they say they will do, let them do that.
Okay.
Let there not be like any wire anymore. Before this presidential election, they conducted some very successful ones like in Anambra, Ekiti, or soon in time past, and people had that confidence, but they collectively quashed it this time around. So let them begin one step at a time, right? To get it right again. But of course, you can't be sure that they can have that same level of turnouts they have had in time past in those states. I can assure you of that.
Thank you, Chukwuma. Simply put, INEC should do whatever it promises to do. Now, Sopitan, as we wrap up today's conversation on this topic, looking ahead, how might this Supreme Court decision affect the future of democratic processes, electoral transparency, and political engagement in Nigeria, both in the short term and in the long term?
Well, I think to answer that question, you've got to determine how fair, just, and right the Supreme Court ruling has been. And so there are two angles to this. On the one hand, the Supreme Court went as expected with technicalities, and sometimes these technicalities are necessary. They're arguments that you have to make. On the basis of technicalities, the Supreme Court was right. Everything they said was in accordance with the law. So there's no way that they were going to overturn the decisions of the lower court because the burden of proof simply was not met by the people that were trying to prove their cases. And then admitting new evidence, very damning new evidence, they were not going to be able to do that because the law does not necessarily permit them. Yes, they could have, they have the discretion, but you have to exercise that discretion with some level of responsibility. So I think that on the side of technicalities, Supreme Court was right. But the problem is that we now have a moral problem that the Supreme Court failed to deal with. We now know that there is evidence, and this is not me saying this, it's the facts out there. There is ample evidence out there that our president perhaps might have lied under oath with the things that he submitted. There's nothing we can do about it because the Supreme Court has confirmed his election. But there is evidence that he might have submitted forged or fake certificates, that there are questions surrounding his identity. All of these things are documented. And that the Supreme Court did not deal with the substance of the matter. And
but
that
the Supreme
remains
Court,
a problem in our democracy.
do you think the Supreme Court didn't do it because the time for admitting new evidence had elapsed, or they just chose to ignore?
Yes, absolutely. No. They were very categorical. They made it clear that, in fact, I remember Justice Okoro saying clearly that, where were you? What were you doing? INEC had published the particulars of the various contestants as far back as June 2022. You had all the time in the world to go to Chicago State University and get all of this evidence that you now have, such that you would have even, as a pre-election matter, you could have even stopped the man dead in his tracks at that time. So the Supreme Court was basically saying the law does not permit us. The law says that there must be evidence that you could not have gotten that or the new facts you are presenting before now. So the Supreme Court did not do anything wrong in that regard.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Segun Sopitan, Chairman, Accountability, Candour and Transparency Network for Political Discussions, and also Chukwuma Okenwa, Executive Director, Lead Network Africa. It was an absolute pleasure speaking to you both. Thanks for your insights and candor. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching The Conversation on News Central Television. We'll go on a quick break, and when we return, we will discuss the World Bank's approval of a $1 billion loan to help South Africa with its blackout problems. So stay with us. We'll be right back.